Lawrence Peterson was 19 and Dory Woods was 20 years old in 1984. They had been together for 2 years. They were each other's first loves and their lives revolved around each other. Lawrence was from Indiana, a surfer who played the guitar and worked at a shoe store. Dory was a model who designed and sold clothes to her friends. Blonde, suntanned, and beautiful, to the world they appeared to be the perfect couple. But there was a dark side to the pair. It started with cocaine, and then someone introduced them to crack, and their lives took a turn for the worse. They were arrested in January for burglary while Dory was 7 months pregnant. They were put on probation. They were contemplating giving the child up for adoption, but they decided to keep it. And in June, they welcomed their first child, a little boy they named Lawrence Allen Peterson Woods. Little Lawrence was 7 months old and in his stroller when Dory was arrested for shoplifting jeans and a jean jacket. The judge showed mercy on her and gave her a stricter probation, which forbade her from leaving the house. But 3 days later was Friday, payday, and Lawrence Sr. had no plans on staying home. He wanted to spend his money at the crack house. Dory didn't want to go at first, but she didn't want him to spend all the rent money either. So she got dressed, asked her sister to watch the baby, and a family friend offered to give them a ride. They arrived after midnight to a small efficiency apartment in a triplex at 576 Northeast 62nd Street in Miami, Florida, the home of Gladstone Brightly, a Jamaican man who was a small-time drug dealer. At 1:20 a.m., Brightly's neighbors were awakened by the thunderous roar of automatic gunfire. A few minutes later, a neighbor went to investigate. She opened the door to the apartment and found Brightly riddled with bullets in a pool of blood. She screamed and called police. When they arrived, they found Brightly and 4 others dead, including Lawrence and Dory, who was 3 months pregnant. This incident will be the city of Miami's introduction to Jamaica's most ruthless gang, the Shower Posse, and its leader, Lester Coke. Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. All right. Today, we're going to be talking about the Shower Posse, the gang that brought the ruthlessness of the Jamaican slums to the streets of America. After Jamaica became independent of England in 1962, 2 parties emerged and fought for leadership. The Jamaican Labour Party, or JLP, and the People's National Party, the PNP. Each party had its strongholds in the slums of Kingston, and from the beginning, each party used the gangs in the areas to control them with violence. The young gangsters of Jamaica watched a lot of American movies, westerns in particular. They idolized the gunmen they saw in the movies and called their gangs posses after the groups in the westerns. In the mid-1960s, gangs started to appear in the overpopulated city of Kingston. They had names like the Spanglers, the Skulls, the Tel Aviv, the Hot Steppers, Southside, the Vikings, the Zulu Gang, and the Phoenix Posse. The Phoenix Posse came from the Tivoli Gardens public housing projects right outside of Kingston. In 1967, the Phoenix Posse was led by an 18-year-old named Claude Massop. Massop was in the construction business, and that made him important to the parties. To secure their neighborhood strongholds, political parties would often burn down houses and hold neighborhoods of people who did not support them and replace them with party loyalists. The contracts to rebuild the homes were given to contractors loyal to the party leaders. During election time, the posses were used to make sure that their party was the party that won. For 10 or so years, the political violence took the lives of hundreds of Jamaicans. The PNP and the JLP armed the posses and they terrorized the city. Massop and the Phoenix Posse were loyal to the JLP and its leader, Edward Seaga. The opposition, the PNP, was led by Michael Manley. In exchange for their help, the posses were given political protection for the crimes they committed. The Phoenix Posse from Tivoli Gardens proved that they were the most violent posse in Kingston. When they killed people, they overkilled them, showering their victims with lead. By the late 1970s, they were known as the Shower Posse. The political violence would die down after the elections, but the hard feelings didn't. Often, the members of the losing side would leave the country to escape retribution with help from their political allies. In 1972, the People's National Party won the election and Michael Manley became the prime minister. During the '76 election, the violence was so bad that Manley called a state of emergency. This meant that anyone caught with a gun faced long prison sentences. But the violence continued. In April of 1978, the 2 parties came to a peace agreement. A concert was held with Bob Marley giving his first performance in Jamaica in years. Both Seaga, Manley, and their gunmen openly embraced each other on stage. The peace lasted less than a year. On February 4th, 1979, Claude Massop, Lloyd Frazier, and Alphonse Tinson were in Spanish Town attending a football match involving the Tivoli Gardens football team. After the match, they jumped into a taxi and headed back to Tivoli. Soon, they were being followed by a police car. The policemen were loyal to the PNP, and Massop was far from his home base and was a sitting duck. The cops pulled alongside the taxi and shots rang out. The police sprayed the car and filled Massop with lead. He died on the scene. Massop was gone, but he was not the only one in the posse that had power. Lester Leslie Coke grew up like most kids in Kingston's ghetto, poor and hungry. He lived in Tivoli Gardens too, and he was mentored by Massop. Coke grew up to be 5'10", 200 pounds, strong and aggressive. He took the nickname Jim Brown, taken from the hard-running NFL Hall of Famer and movie star by the same name. As a teen, he dropped out of school and became a welder, a carpenter, and a locksmith. By the 70s, he was a contractor and an underling to Massop. He made a lot of money from building homes, but he also made a lot of money from Jamaica's #1 cash crop, marijuana. In the 1980 election, the violence ramped up again, and 700 Jamaicans lost their lives, and the JLP and its leader, Edward Seager, were victorious, and Coke was a big part of it. Even though both parties denied being involved with the posses, they benefited from the violence. By now, Coke was the #1 bodyguard for Edward Seager and practically untouchable. He had diplomatic immunity and traveled with Seager abroad to the US and Canada. He used his connections in Jamaica and abroad to set up smuggling routes into the US, and he used the many Jamaicans in America to distribute the ganja. In the 1980s, the Reagan administration started America's war on drugs. This made it harder for Jamaican weed dealers and South American cocaine cartels to get their product into the States. But Lester Coke had built one of the best smuggling networks around. The Cali cartel in Colombia handpicked Coke and the Shower Posse to smuggle and distribute cocaine for them in America. In May of 1984, Lester Coke led a 2-day arson and killing spree in West Kingston in which 12 people were killed, and Coke personally shot and killed 15-year-old Oliver Clark. There were several witnesses, so instead of waiting for the police to arrest him, Coke used his political connections to obtain false IDs and passports, and he made his way to Miami. For 10 years, posse members had been flooding into Florida. Some of the members were on the run from the law or the opposing party. Now, getting into America was easy. A man would fly to the Bahamas, stay for the week, then he would bribe an official for a boarding pass onto an American cruise ship on a day cruise from Florida. Now, there were no custom officials on the cruise ships, so he would take the ship to Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands, and once there was no documentation needed to board a flight to Miami. In 1984, Coke and his Shower Posse hit the U.S. like the plague. From Miami, they spread out across the country. Fort Lauderdale, New York, Houston, Boston, Philly, KC, DC, Cleveland, Dallas, Chicago, LA, Denver, Hartford, Connecticut, Toronto, and Montreal, Canada. The Shower Posse entered each city with the intention of taking over the drug business. They did not negotiate. If they wanted a drug corner, they would shower the corner with lead. When the bodies were cleared and the cops left, they would start selling drugs on the corner. A cop would later say, "I've never seen a group splatter people like the Jamaicans. They actually try to take people out in public places. They don't care if innocent people get hit in the crossfire." Lester Coke and the Shower Posse would not stand for competitors, even fellow Jamaicans. Although they were the largest, the Shower Posse was not the only Jamaican posse in the States. Many other posses had sent members over and were doing the same thing. Gladstone Brightly was one of those men. He sold a little coke, and he was one of the first in Miami to sell crack. On November 30th, 1984, Gladstone was in his efficiency with another man and 2 women. When Lawrence Peterson, Dory Woods, and a friend arrived at Gladstone's, they came in, made themselves comfortable, and began to partake. Gladstone's friend was in the kitchen cooking crack on a Bunsen burner. There were 17 small rocks wrapped in aluminum foil, all ready to go. At 1:20 a.m., Lester Coke and the Shower Posse members pulled up to Gladstone's in a tan van. Coke and his right-hand man, Vivian Blake, and a third man walked towards the apartment. The others stayed in the car with the engine running. Coke knocked on the door, and when it was answered, they burst in with guns drawn. They forced everyone in the house to get on their knees. Neighbors reported no yelling or screaming, just gunshots. Coke and his associates opened fire on them with Uzis and .45s at close range. 5 people were killed and 1 was wounded severely. During the commotion, 1 man was able to make a run for it and escape. After the shooting, Coke, Blake, and the other walked back to the van and drove off. But they were not done yet. They circled the block looking for the man who escaped, and when they saw him, they fired at him again from the van, but he was able to escape again. 20 rounds had been fired, and all but one hit their mark. All victims had been shot multiple times in the head and body. Some had defensive wounds in their hands, and Dory's was still folded in prayer. She was praying for the life of her and her unborn child when Coke executed her. The posses used America's liberal gun laws to arm the small armies they had in the States and in Jamaica. They would buy guns in Ohio, Virginia, and in Indiana. Then the guns would be shipped around the country to posse members who needed them. Some of them were used in crimes and then sent back to Jamaica along with any ballistic evidence to be used again there. They favored the Israeli-made Uzi and the American-made Smith & Wesson 9mm that they modified to shoot 100 rounds a minute. When crack hit the streets of America, the posses became filthy rich. They bought coke from Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia at $15,000 a key, sold it to Jamaicans in the U.S. for $25,000 a key, and then they sold it on the streets and in the crack houses for $125,000. They went to each city with the intent of taking over the drug markets, and they killed anyone who got in the way. There were 3,000 members nationwide by 1987. There were 500 members of various posses with 75 crack houses just in West and Southwest Philly. In 6 months, 8 people had been killed in Philly alone. Dealers would barricade themselves in the crack houses and sell $25 bags of crack through a slot in the door. Once a worker started his shift, he stayed inside, and food and product was delivered and money was picked up. When the cops raided, it would take 15 to 20 minutes to break the door down. During that time, the men would dump everything down the toilet. When they were arrested, posse members gave fake names and IDs. When they got bail, they skipped to the next town and hid out with posse members there and started the cycle over. One Philly cop said, "They sell crack at 8th and Butler for $20, but the Jamaicans had better coke." Vivian Blake was the second in command of the Shower Posse. The son of a P&P party leader, in 1973, he received a scholarship to play soccer at Columbia University in New York City. He didn't play long. He dropped out and began to sell marijuana and cocaine. Blake, despite being the son of a P&P official, became a member of the JLP-associated Shower Posse. In the 80s, Blake was running a multi-million-dollar drug operation based in the Bronx. In 1985, Reverend Patrick Walker of the Bronx said that he had 2,000 Jamaicans in his congregation and he buried 100 young Jamaican boys who were tied up in coke and weed in a year. While Lester Coke was a brute, Vivian Blake was educated and refined, but just as deadly. Now, like I said, the Shower Posse was not the only Jamaican gang in the U.S. doing what they were doing. The Spangler Posse was also from Kingston, and they were supporters of Manley and the P&P in Jamaica. Both political parties benefited from the sale of drugs in America. The posses would send most, if not all, of the money they made in America back to the islands and into the coffers of either the JLP or the P&P. The Shower Posse and the Spangler Posse had been enemies for years in Jamaica, and the two groups took their political beefs with them when they moved to the States. On September 16, 1984, the Shower Posse killed a member of the Spangler Posse and wounded 3 women in an attack at a Jamaican club in the Bronx. On March 3, 1985, the Spangler struck back by wounding several people in the club in Manhattan. On March 31, 1985, a few Spangler Posse were attending a party in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. At around 1:30 a.m., Vivian Blake and members of the Shower Posse pulled up to the party, and 2 or 3 men got out of the car. When they got to the front door, they pulled weapons, and then shots rang out. Men fired Uzis and automatic handguns indiscriminately into the crowd of 300, sending people scattering. When the smoke cleared, several people were injured, and Anthony Forgy, the 23-year-old DJ, was dead. On August 3, 1985, 2,000 Jamaicans from all over New Jersey and New York were bused to Oakland, New Jersey, to the FRG Sports Complex, a swim club, to celebrate their country's independence. A member of the Shower Posse and a member of the Spanglers got into an argument. Both men pulled guns and shots rang out. Other men on both sides pulled guns and they shot it out while 2,000 bystanders ran for their lives. Ricardo Quiles, a 37-year-old bus driver, and Hopton Reed of Brooklyn were killed. Men from both sides were arrested and the cops confiscated 31 guns, including a machine gun, 60 assorted knives, chains, and clubs, and 1 machete. One of the Shower Posse arrested had just been released on bail after shooting a New York police officer in the ass while trying to escape an arrest. He had been handcuffed but not searched properly. he was able to get his gun out and shot the cop before being tackled by the other officers. That was not a rare occasion. Back in Jamaica, the posses had little trust in the police. In the 70s, the Jamaican police were responsible for 1/3 of the murders on the island. So to the posses, they were just another gang that they were at war with. The cops shot at them, and they shot at the cops. That's how it was. And they brought that attitude with them to the States. On August 29, 1985, Colin Fowles was playing in a soccer game at Bunch Park in Miami that was attended by 100 or so people. Shower Posse members pulled up to the game, ran on the field, and sprayed it with lead. Colin Fowles was not a posse member, but he had on the same uniform as the man they were looking for. Another woman was also wounded. This had only been a few months since Lester Coke and Vivian Blake killed the 5 people in the crack house. The police had Coke as a suspect in that and 10 more murders. According to the authorities, Coke was back in Jamaica, but he was arrested on July 17, 1985, when he and 9 others were caught during a Metro Police raid in North Dade County. 106 pounds of marijuana was seized, and Coke and the rest were taken to the station. But because of a bad warrant, Coke was released. On Memorial Day, May 26, 1986, 7 people were shot when Shower Posse members shot up Kenny Park in Hartford, Connecticut. 4 days later, police burst into an apartment, and after a fight in which 2 cops were injured, they arrested 3 Shower Posse members. Fitzroy Pepper Campbell, Ian White, a fugitive on a drug charge in California, and David Farquharson, 19, a Haitian immigrant, was shot in the stomach and leg as he tried to flee the apartment. He would survive. In January of 1986, Edward Dixon from the West Oak Lane section of Philadelphia stole $12,000 worth of drugs from a Jamaican woman named Dion Lewis, who was associated with the Shower Posse. On January 13th, Lewis pointed Dixon out as he stood in front of a bar. 3 men walked up to him, grabbed him, shoved him into a silver van, and drove off. The body was found in Bucks County a few hours later. His necktie was used to tie his hand behind his back, and he was shot twice in the head and once in the chest. Dion Lewis was found in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, a few weeks later and arrested. She was returned to Philadelphia and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Lester Coke was trying to use his connections in Jamaica to get permanent citizenship in America, but the cops had other plans. He was arrested again on January 15, 1987 at his INS hearing. Now, he was suspected in 10 murders, but there was not enough evidence yet to bring him to trial. But the Miami police, the DEA, and the ATF wanted him gone. He was still wanted in Jamaica for the arson and murder from '84, but Jamaica was not trying to extradite him. He would eventually be deported back to the island. Conveniently, his murder charges in Jamaica went away after brothers of witness Andrea Hunter disappeared, and she changed her testimony. In Boston, one landlord who got tired of seeing drugs being sold outside of his building tried to evict the dealers who were Shower Posse members. He was beaten and thrown into a tub. A sock was shoved into his mouth, and he was shot in the leg. In February of '87, 50 people were dancing at a Cambridge, Massachusetts reggae club when automatic gunfire ruined the vibe and sent everyone scattering for cover. A Shower Posse member from the Bronx was killed, and another man was wounded, but he was able to make it home. When the cops went to question him in his Dorchester home, they found another man shot to death in front of his home. Shower Posse members had gone to his home after the club shooting to finish him off, but he got one of them instead. The brother of the man who was killed in Dorchester vowed revenge, but he failed. His body was found in a car behind Lee School in Dorchester. He had been stabbed to death, stuffed in the trunk, and the car was set on fire. In February of 1987, Houston police and customs agents seized $2.8 million in drugs and $313,000 in cash during a month-long crackdown on airport smuggling. 52 were arrested in a drug operation in which weed brought in Texas at $500 to $800 a pound was sold for twice as much around the country. In Philly, Shower Posse members Michael Lee and David Brown had a problem. Michael Collins, a man they used to bring in drugs, was refusing to make a run. So they lured his 17-year-old son from New Mexico to Philly after telling him his father was there. When the boy arrived, they took him to a house on Mannheim Street in Germantown and held him hostage. They then called his father, who was in the Bahamas, and told him that if he didn't make the run, they would kill his son. Collins contacted Philly police, and the boy was located alive on May 26, 1987. When the cops busted in the place, they recovered an Uzi, a 9mm, and a .22 caliber handgun. Andrew Price was 17 years old, and he was a drug courier for the Spangler Posse in Philadelphia. On September 21, 1987, he was in a drug house on 53rd Street run by Shower Posse members. An altercation broke out, and Andrew was stabbed, killed, and robbed of $1,500 and some cocaine. His body was stuffed into the trunk of a car and left at 53rd and Whitby, where it would be found 2 days later. Kempis Songster, 18 of Brooklyn, and Damian Boone, 19 of East Germantown, were arrested and charged with the murder. In 1988, the ATF, FBI, DEA, and local law enforcement from New York, Miami, and Houston coordinated to take the posses down. They called it Operation Rum Punch. On October 13th, 200 Jamaican posse members were arrested in Miami, and another 434 spread across 20 states were sought, including Vivian Blake. The posses were said to have been involved with 1,400 drug-related murders since January of 1985, as well as kidnapping, assault, robberies, domestic and international weapons trafficking, money laundering, and fraud. Vivian Blake, Lester Coke, and 33 members of the Shower Posse were hit with a 62-count indictment for marijuana and cocaine smuggling, illegal arms purchases, and racketeering. Coke was facing 65 years and $1 million fine, but Blake's charges were the heaviest. He was facing 390 years in jail and $15.5 million in fines. The two were charged with ordering the July 5, 1984 murder of Carl McKenzie in the Bronx. Errol Kong Hussing, Blake's brother, was identified as the killer. The November 6, 1984 slaying of Noel McIntosh and the attempted murder of 3 others in Miami. Vivian Blake and Kirk Bruce, another high-ranking member, were the shooters. The November 30th, 1984 murders of Gladstone Brightly, Elaine Wooden, Jeanette Brazil, Dory Woods, and Larry Patterson in the crack house in Miami. Blake, Coke, and members Richard Morrison and Ronald Jones were the shooters. And the September 23rd, 1985 killing of Roy Windlass and an unknown woman in Los Angeles. Vivian Blake, Samuel Brown, Junior Ezekiel Wilson, and another member only identified as Banana were the killers. The rest were in custody. Vivian Blake would leave the country and head back to Jamaica. In Jamaica, Lester Coke was a folk hero, Robin Hood type of a character. Being a Shower Posse member became the goal for young men in Tivoli Gardens, and they would do anything to get noticed by the Don Dada, as he and other posse bosses were known as. He was loved so much in Tivoli and other slums in Trenchtown that even the police could not touch him there. Coke was riding through Kingston one day when bus driver Jerome White cut him off. Coke and his posse members stopped the bus. White was pulled from the bus and beaten and stabbed in front of many witnesses. He would later die from his injuries. That was on Friday. On Monday, the police came to Tivoli Garden in an armored personnel vehicle. They were met by the citizens who were there protecting Coke. The police arrested 1,000 Shower Posse members that day, but not Coke. He would turn himself in and would be found not guilty after no witnesses were willing to testify. When he left the courthouse, thousands of supporters were there, and they picked him up and carried him back to Tivoli. In 1991, the U.S. government began to put pressure on the Jamaican government to extradite Coke to the U.S. to face his murder charges for the 1984 slaying in the crack house. He allowed himself to be arrested and was placed in the maximum security prison while he appealed his extradition. In Tivoli Gardens, Free Jim Brown graffiti was painted on the walls. On February 2, 1992, Mark Coke, Lester's son, known as Ja T, was shot and killed in Kingston while riding his bike. This may have stemmed from an altercation with another posse don or a previous drug deal that went bad. No one knows. But it sparked a war in the streets of Kingston. In February, Lester Coke lost his appeal to stay in Jamaica. And in the early hours of February 23, 1992, days before he was to be taken to Florida to face murder charges, there was a fire in the cell block. When the guards got everything under control, Lester Lloyd Coke was found in the cell, burnt to a crisp. The authorities looked into foul play, but found nothing. I don't think they looked too hard. Thousands of Jamaicans turned out to see the Don Dada put to rest, including Edward Seaga, the JLP party leader. Vivian Blake was still in Jamaica, hiding in plain sight. He was placed on the FBI's most wanted list where he stayed for more than a decade. In 1999, he lost his extradition fight and was sent back to the U.S. to face trial. He took a plea deal and was sentenced to 28 years. He was released after 8 and returned to Jamaica, where he died in 2012 at the age of 53. The Shower Posse will remain relevant in the drug game throughout the U.S., Canada, and the UK for years, run by Lester's son, Christopher Dudas Coke, until he was extradited to the U.S. and sentenced to 23 years for drug trafficking in 2012. And that, my friends, is the story of the Jamaican Shower Posse. I hope you guys enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed telling it. I hope you learned some things about the Shower Posse you didn't know before. If you like what we do over here at A Few Bad Men and you want to join the crew, first thing you got to do is you got to bump off that subscribe button. Then you got to break that thumb like it owes you something. Then you gotta ring that bell and set it for all notifications so you don't miss anything. If you really like what I do over here and you wanna help support the channel, there's a few ways. You can join the YouTube membership, or you could join the Patreon, and you can see the images that I can't show you on YouTube. The merch store is open. If you wanna go grab yourself a hoodie or a shirt or a coffee mug, you can do that. Or if you just want to slide an envelope upstairs to the boss to help the channel run smooth, the PayPal link is down below. All right, so this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I see you in the funnies.